now I would please like to just remind us about 2020 again. We have been, it was certainly a year to remember, and we have been utilizing the conference to unpack it both privately with one another in conversation and in community. We noted the injustices that it highlighted and the gaps that it uncovered. Today, we are hosting concurrent panels to discuss the year with members of our community and of our food system. In this session, we will hear from Jonathan Gingerich, who is an organic grain farmer and greenhouse grower in Plain City, Ohio, at Yonie's Greenhaus. We've got Ben Bebenroth here, who is a chef and restaurateur, caterer, and farmer who raises vegetables and other specialty crops at Spice Acres in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Northeast Ohio. And Sasha Sigetic, who manages the Agroecology program at Hocking College and raises dairy goats at Black Locust Livestock and Herbal in Meigs County. So we will hear from each of the panelists and ask them a few questions. We'll hear from them about how 2020 went for them, what they faced, how they adapted, what gives them hope, my personal favorite, and how they plan to move forward stronger, or whatever portion of that they're able to cover in their 10 minutes. We'll ask that you please place those questions, as I mentioned, in the chat, and we may have time to take more at the end as well. But if you could just put them in the chat for now, we'll cover them as they go. I'd like to now turn it over to Jonathan. If you'd please go first for us, Jonathan. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. I missed too much of the conference because of other conflicts, but it's been enjoyable what I did get. So 2020, what a year. Started out unsuspecting as usual, just a few rumblings of a virus in China, and with a greenhouse season like we have, you know, this is all planned the summer, the fall before. Final ordering is done in January. We start seeds, we get hanging basket plants like this week, in the middle of February. And so everything is set up in gear, in motion for the season ahead. And then in March, when shutdown happened, we were like, ooh, how's this going to work? You know, are we going to be able to move ahead? You know, at first I was like, so if a lot of people are out of jobs, are they going to spend money on flowers? And we do vegetable and flowers, herbs, perennials, whatever, but, you know, a lot of flowers. So we weren't sure how it was going to affect everything. You know, if you think about having several greenhouses full of young plants, it's not like a hard good that you can put on a shelf when you get to open back up several months later, because the season's done by the end of June, you know. So it was hard to know, but we just moved ahead with our plans. We start retailing around the mid of April, and we heard from some other greenhouses further south where the season is ahead of ours that they were selling like crazy. So we were like, well, maybe this will be okay. Also, you know, thankfully our governor decided that the greenhouse businesses are essential. Where in some other states, they were shut down for a bit at least. So we were grateful for that. You know, there were extra challenges in figuring out, okay, so what's the law as far as retailing, getting signage, getting disinfectant, gloves, you know, protection, 6-foot distancing markers and all of that fun stuff. Try doing that on gravel for your retail line. Anyhow, so yeah, it was just, it took extra effort to figure out how to retail. Obviously another effort was the whole mask thing. Try hustling around a hot, humid greenhouse once it hits 70 or more in a mask. So that was a challenge for us. Thankfully, what actually ended up happening was that most people around here either retained their jobs or got unemployment, and no one was doing all the other fun stuff they usually do that takes money. So people had money. People were at home. They said, hey, let's plant a garden. Hey, let's plant some flowers. Let's make our place look good. And we had a record year. Most greenhouses had a record year. And to the extent that some of the wholesale greenhouses that I buy plants from, I can't grow everything that I sell. So like the one supplier, I usually get 2 full loads from him in the spring. When I was going to get my second load, it was, he didn't have any product left. So I had to find other places to get them. I went to wholesale greenhouse, a wholesale produce auction to buy plants. And so I was able to get plants, but often I was paying higher prices than normal wholesale prices just to get plants onto my shelves. So in spite of selling more, the profitability wasn't necessarily high. So in fact, I ran out of pepper plants, for example, and with gardening such strong demand, I really wanted to have pepper plants. I spent as high as $17 a flat to buy pepper plants, when I sell them for $16.99 if someone gets a whole flat of vegetables. So no profitability there, but it was a service. I had plants for people. So I was happy I was able to do that. That was, you had to adapt with that and just try to meet the demand. So that was an extra challenge. So yeah, all in all, the greenhouse season was great. We were busy, we were challenged. We ended up grossing 41% more than we ever did before. So that was good. Like I said, the profitability didn't necessarily match that growth. Julia, I forgot to start my timer. Where am I at? Anyhow, okay. So as far as the greenhouse, hope for the future, I think probably there were a number of people who jumped into gardening with great big plans, and all of you know that gardening is work. Gardening takes weeding, and probably some people had weed fiascos and said, nah, I'm not doing this again. And probably others were like, this is cool, I'm going to do this again. I'm expecting a good season this year. I don't know how strong it will be. We have limited space. We're basically doing what we can, and we'll flex with buying in as we need it. As far as plans to move forward, I'm hopeful for the greenhouse that as more people, we definitely got new customers. So as more people know about us, I think it'll help strengthen the business. Just more people. Another thing I didn't mention, like last spring, with us being an essential business, and a lot of other businesses being closed, some people were coming out in April just to be in a greenhouse, just to be around flowers, just to get out, just to soothe their spirits rather than sitting at home listening to depressing news all day. Walk around a greenhouse, look at the beauty of God's creation and flowers. I mean, it's got to put a smile on your face and peace in your heart, And so people did that. And I'm hopeful that new people who experience the blessing of growing plants and the beauty of flowers will keep doing that. It's good for us. Growing your own food is a wonderful thing. As far as the organic grain, I'm an organic grain farmer. Being a farmer, being out in the fields and so forth, COVID didn't directly impact that. For whatever reason that we still are trying to figure out, the organic corn price took a serious hit. Like I'm getting $2.25 a bushel less for my organic corn this season than I did last season. And that's like a, $16,000 difference for me, So I want to buy equipment. That's so much less money that I have to buy equipment. And, I think some of that, some people think it could be that because of COVID, certain organic markets may be down. Others think it was over importation of corn that has softened the market. But that's definitely putting a crunch on us, organic grain farmers. The wheat is also soft on price. Soybeans have pretty much held their own. So I'm not sure how to be hopeful for that. It seems like no one so far has really figured this out and come up with what's going on with that. I basically farm myself, have a little bit of help from dad or the boys or someone during crunch times. But so COVID didn't, directly impact me as far as the farming operation itself. So I guess my hope is in the Lord Jesus Christ. He's going to take care of us. We'll flex, we'll do the best we can. And I'm looking forward to life. I think it's going to be great. Not everything is good. A lot of people, I feel bad for the people who had to be closed, but we're going to get through this. That's all.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's really nice to be able to hear from you on the two different types of businesses too, the greenhouse and the grain. Let's move forward. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, I think I missed something there. Let's move forward and have Ben get started. Ben, I'll let you know when you're at 5 and at 1, okay? 5 and 1. All right, go ahead and unmute yourself, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, 2020 was probably one of the heavier years of my life. The week before the governor gave the shutdown order for restaurants, so I've had a catering business for 17 years. I started in my grandparents' basement. Had a restaurant in downtown Cleveland in Gordon Square Arts District for 8 years. We were one of the best restaurants in the city for the last 8 years, and then obviously the farm and the venue down in the Cuyahoga Valley. And then we have a nonprofit called Spice Field Kitchen. We do place-based learning and revolutionary food engagement in 4 different school districts. So we teach a lot of demos in classes, bring kids out to the farm for field trips and whatnot. So we had a lot of irons in the fire that were contingent upon large groups gathering, basically. So 2020 was a dumpster fire. And we lost about $40,000 the week before the governor gave the shutdown order. So I already knew on the Saturday before the shutdown order what we had to do. The restaurant had been always our flagship brick and mortar, but it never really made money. The only time we were making money is when we were packed in nuts to butts, Fridays and Saturday nights, and having 92 seats in a restaurant that is only making money when you're turning those seats 3 times a night. The writing was on the wall. So we were already watching it. We run on EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. So we watch our numbers very closely. We have these L10 meetings, radical engagement of just communication and accountability. And I laid off 35 people on March 16th, and we issued a food, shelter, and security assessment to our entire staff, because a lot of these people work paycheck to paycheck. A dishwasher that makes $12 an hour and works 25 hours a week. Take away all that money, and now all of a sudden you're looking at like, okay, can you eat? Are you going to be homeless? Like, these are very real problems that I think my industry in food and beverage is probably more in touch with than a lot. So we laid off 35 people. We issued 2 weeks of staple foods to each employee. cleaned out the coolers, and broke the entire restaurant down, prepared for riots in 8 hours. So within 8 hours, every bit of furniture, alcohol, cash, computers, food, everything was out of that building. And we've been living there for 8 years. So that was emotional. It was very difficult. What do we deal with? We dealt with a lot of inequality. You know, I have a very diverse workforce here, across the boundaries of every racial and ethnic and religious background and LGBT, you name it. We employ them. You know, restaurant is everybody's second job. So everybody's an artist, everybody's an actor. And the inequality of the income brackets of who I serve versus who I employ is like, I mean, you couldn't pick a larger chasm to examine. So it really made me feel like, you know, we're going to these mansions of these doctors and lawyers and everything. And I'm, you know, surveying my team for whether or not they're going to be sleeping under a bridge in 2 months. So it just kind of rocked me to my core. I had an identity crisis around it after the 2 weeks after we closed. And I just really started to think like, what have I missed every holiday for the last 15 years? Every birthday party, every, you know, volleyball meets, gymnastics competitions. Like, I was always in the restaurant. I was always at somebody's table side talking to them about the local beats and the walleye special and all this shit. And it just boof, gone instantly. And so I really had to ask myself, like, what are we doing and why? And what are we sacrificing and for what? And if we were putting all of these family memories and emotional exchanges with our loved ones on hold for the exchange of money, and now you don't even have that, it was like, it was a real visit with, you know, mortality almost, because the mortality of our business was very obvious. So, you know, when we mothballed that, we hung on. The restaurant would close March 16th, but we hung on with catering until August. And just tried to work with clients, and, you know, they were postponing, and we were coming up with COVID plan A, B, C, D. And by August 14th, we canceled the rest of 2020 on our clients and stopped waiting for our clients to cancel on us, because we were just spending an enormous amount of money planning and pivoting. And then you'd get within striking distance of a wedding and they would shut it down 7 days out. And then I was in this uncomfortable space, to say, well, I have $11,000 of this person's money that contractually I don't have to refund. So it was very challenging for those 4 months. So how are we adapting, I think, is the most important part of this conversation. We're reinventing ourselves. We pivoted our farm to table fine dining restaurant, and we're coming back as a digital online ordering platform of delivery foods for home meal kits. And that now I'm wrestling with the idea of, how am I getting food to people? Am I increasing single-use plastic packaging? And like, there's a lot of threads that connect to a lot of the larger socioeconomic and environmental problems in the world that I feel like so many people just took a business first mentality to food delivery and said, well, I got to stay alive. I got to keep a margin. I got to keep employees. And meanwhile, you're just like punching a hole in the earth. I wrestle with that on the daily. So we're starting this Keep the Change Kitchen Collective, where we're going to launch 5 brands in March. And then we're opening a chain of pizza shops so that we can sell local foods via a platform of crust, in the idea of, you got to sell what sells, man. And fine dining for, 3-hour long form dining experience it's a dying experience in the world. And we've been watching that for years, but now COVID really rushed that. So hope and what gives it to me. So I have a very different perspective on this. My brother's an air marshal and in the Secret Service. So he was boots on the ground protecting Kamala Harris for the whole election. And then he was in DC for the insurrection, and just the racist culture outing itself, that gives me hope, because that has to stop. And it was just so disheartening to see that and be watching that with my employees, of like, it's like, how do you justify this? And how do you like endorse this? And how do you continue to pay taxes into this when you're hand in hand, arm in arm with people that have so little and are just looking like, do I even belong here? That was really emotional. So I think that that's like reimagining the future, keeping what matters and the social bonds that make us like a dynamic democratic society. That's what gives me hope. And I'm really grateful that the election went the way it did and that things are starting to get some grip into social progress again. And from moving forward stronger perspective, I think a lot of it is, you know, restaurant owners were sort of looked at as slave owners in the early parts of this because we employ so many minorities and it's a very low wage and very hard work and long hours. So we've made some promises to ourselves that we're not going to expect 60-hour weeks out of people. We're not going to pay below $15 an hour. And you know what? We're going to eat it and we're going to offer medical benefits to all of our employees. And those are the things moving forward as a stronger community. I feel like until we can start to take care of the basis of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you don't have food and shelter and a sense of belonging and trust, then who fucking cares about self-actualization? It doesn't matter. And a lot of times I think that's a tough nut to crack in this industry of, it feels like we're taking advantage of each other too much and expecting a little bit more financial return than is ever there. And we're setting aside too much of our emotional belonging, our feeling of contributing to something as a society. So from a moving forward stronger, I'm starting my day with meditation. I got sober. I made some really powerful changes in my life that allow me to focus more on the humanity and less on the profitability. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Ben. Let me turn it over at this point to Sasha, and I'll just remind folks to pop those questions in the chat. I think we're having a really powerful discussion today. Go ahead, Sasha.
Yeah, agreed. These are really great things y'all are bringing up. So how did 2020 go for me? I think like a lot of you, I feel like I've been running a marathon and nobody has any idea where this like finish line is at exactly. So we just keep running and are trying to sort of hold each other up at the same time. I'm hanging in there. Let's see, what did I face? So as an educator, it's been really interesting trying to on the fly convert an entirely in-person program, like, you know, teaching people how to farm into online format. So I remember in February, I was up in Cleveland with my parents and we were having sort of a little family vacation. And I remember telling my parents, I was like, y'all, you should start stocking up on food. This virus from China is not a joke. I'm watching the news and what's happening and it's going to come here and things are going to get crazy. And my mom was like, really? You really think we need to worry about all that? It's like, yeah, I do. So then lo and behold, March comes and I'm on spring break and I'm like, okay, things are getting serious. We have this new online platform that we were starting to move into called Blackboard, which a lot of colleges use. So I basically spent my spring break ordering more chickens, ordering a whole bunch of seeds and figuring out Blackboard, because then the week after spring break, the administration basically said, okay, we're extending winter or spring break another week. And so all the teachers can basically figure out how to get all of their classes into an online platform. So thankfully I had a little bit of a jump on that and started, but it's challenging. I basically became, I already am all of my students' advisor as well as their teacher, but I became their therapist and their financial advisor. And like the only way I had to connect with them and see them was like through Blackboard Collaborate, which is a lot like Zoom. It's our online like video teaching. So I would get in there and I'd teach for a bit. I took it pretty easy on them. I read a lot of really great stuff online about how, you know, students are really freaking out and having a hard time, and this is not the time for educators to be super hard and super strict. with their grading and stuff. So I took it pretty easy on them and just, you know, it was at the end of every class session, we were all just like, I miss you guys. Like it's such a little family. And I always tell them I'm their farm mom and they're my farm babies. So like just seeing each other online and talking to each other a couple times a week was really, it was one of the only things I think that helped them keep their shit together, quite honestly. As you can imagine, like most kids and people that go into farming, they're not necessarily online techie people. They learn by doing. So, you know, some of my students that were freaking out over trying to get their video camera to work, like just talking them through that and reassuring them that like, we'll be back in person eventually. We just got to get through this spring and part of summer and it's going to be okay, was a lot. And then personally, from a farmer standpoint, so I've been program manager here at Hocking for about 2 years. And when I started full time, I sort of scaled my herd share back because farming is a full-time job as it is. So trying to run, and as far as I know, as far as I can tell, I've got the longest running raw goat milk herd share in the state of Ohio. So I had a pretty core group of herd share members that, you know, have depended on me for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And I had to really scale back. And a lot of folks understood that. And then as soon as the pandemic hit and we didn't know how contagious this virus was, how it stayed on surfaces, and everyone was afraid to go to the grocery store. And I kept getting all these calls like, do you have any room in your herd share? Do you have any room in your herd share? And I was like, where were you guys 4 years ago when I was hand milking 9 goats and I had more milk than people. And I've definitely found this like little bit of resentment, like, oh, so now you need farmers. Like now that the grocery store is a scary place and there's a shortage of bacon because all of the processors are shut down because COVID has spread through their facilities, like it's like all of us local farmers understand like the industrial food system is not, it is a delicate thing. It would not take much, and it did not take much for a lot of it to crumble, which is why we do what we do, right? We know that we are the backbone and we are what's gonna keep people fed in crises. Because what does a grocery store have? Just 3 days worth of food for, you know, the most part, if shipments stopped. So I had to like really examine myself, like, you can't be mad at people. They didn't know this was gonna happen. Like, it's good that they're turning to farmers, and it's not their fault that they, you know, hadn't been buying locally from us in the past. Like, but now I'm hoping that this is like their little lesson. That's one of the things that does give me hope, is like, we see how fragile this industrial food system is now. And like Jonathan said, like more people are gardening, more people are raising food on their own, so much so that now we're making our orders for our indoor and outdoor production classes. And my farm manager, Dan, has said basically, well, Johnny's Seeds is sold out of almost everything. And I think that they're cutting down on how many sort of home gardeners they're selling to and trying to concentrate on their wholesale markets, because this is how we make money, right? Like I need these seeds to teach these kids how to grow things. So I'm encouraged that many people are buying seed and growing, and but it's this tricky, like, okay, but we still need all of these resources too. I hope that our systems and our supply end can really ramp up, and I hope that people continue to keep growing and wanting to buy from small farmers and realize that this is a much better system than the industrial agriculture system. So yeah, basically adapting to being a lot better with tech, like learning how to do Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Meet and Blackboard and all these things that as a farmer I really never had to do before. That has been interesting, learning how to navigate things technologically when, you know, we can't do things in person. Moving forward stronger, I think those technological skills help us. Like Ben was saying, like, how do you do online ordering? How do you get more How do you adapt and bring your services to people since people can't come to you? As far as the goats at home, I've diversified into splitting half my herd into meat goat production. And I've got chickens again for the first time in a few years. So offering eggs as well to my neighbors and whatnot. Just pretty small scale still, because like I said, working full time. I started grad school this year too, on top of everything else. So yeah, running that marathon. So keeping things small but productive, and just trying to diversify as much as possible. And really pushing people. I've still got, it looks like 8 or 9 new students coming in the fall. So my hope is that people still want to farm and see farming as this viable lifestyle, right? That local food is important, and getting younger people involved in it. Because when everything else seems to crap out, at least we've got food still.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, all of you panelists. Everyone is really, I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat, but everyone is really enjoying your conversation and what you've shared. I've got a question here. We'll just roll right into questions and folks can keep popping them into the chat. I've got a question here from Bryn about how sales really increased for their farm in 2020, and how that was a confirmation that consumers do care about their food and where it comes from. And then kind of juxtaposing that with what farmers have heard, or at least what Bryn has heard from chefs from the past 5 years, that consumers don't care and they can't make the margins work. So the question being, how can we use this year that has shown consumers, shown the farmers that the consumers do want to buy local, and how can we translate that buying power back when restaurants, when folks begin to eat out more again? Ben, do you mind starting this one for us?
Sure. You know, there's a lot of truth there. So local food is inherently lower margin because it comes in a different state, right? It's less consistent, it's dirtier, it takes more handwork. And that's nothing against local farmers. I am one. I supply myself with inconsistent, dirty food. So there's no judgment there. But it all comes down to labor, you know? And so the new model is totally different. Like when people start going out to eat again, I think there needs to be a focus on fulfilling the need. And the need is basic. It's primal. It's just consumption. It's fuel. And we were so trapped in the experience-based space. And I think a lot of the local food purveyors and local food restaurants were exclusively offering an experience instead of sustenance. And that's the shift that I think is primary in the reinvention of the food space, is seeing ourselves on par with Arby's and McDonald's, right? And that's hurtful in some capacity, but on the other capacity, it's like, well, look at how much food these businesses are selling at the pace they're selling it at, and yet we're dying on the cook line to sell 30 plates a night because it's so long form and so drawn out, right? So how can we put ourselves in a space of saying, we know people are busier now. Dual income households are now juggling also online schooling, right? My wife and I are working out of the house a lot of times together while the kids are upstairs on Zooms. We have even less time now, even though we have more time. So seeing ourselves in how does that fit in to just eating on the daily, you know? Meal prep takes a long time. Shopping takes a long time. The farmer's market experience is totally different now, where it's drive-through and pre-order. It's not a lot of that social engagement. So looking at that from a 30,000 foot view and saying, okay, people need to eat. The industrial food system is obviously flawed and extremely exposed. Now, where do local foods fit into that? And how can they be a more practical application of facilitating just dietary need as opposed to date night and experience? So that's where I'm at right now in a thought process. I don't have the answers, but I'm regularly visiting with those questions.
Other panelists care to jump in there? I think, Sasha, you touched on that a little bit, and Jonathan, you did in the sense of folks growing their own food.
I'm not sure if I have a lot to say, but one thing, I think the more people get educated about the power of really good food, nutrient dense food, the more maybe they'll be willing to put that extra effort into cleaning that dirty vegetable and cooking their own meal. And because they know it is real sustenance. Now, if Ben could take that local food and put it on a pizza platter and sell it fast food, maybe that would be a good way that some people could, in their busy lifestyle, still get something that's really healthful.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting to see everybody jump on the sourdough train at the beginning of the pandemic, which I did too. I was like, okay, I'm home. I'll take care of another living thing. Add sourdough to the list. And a lot of other restaurants, I've got a lot of chef friends, Ben, that are doing the same thing. They're switching to this like sort of ordering. My friend Becky from Pork and Pickles is doing like crock pot meals, but figuring out, like, now that people are home a lot more and cooking for themselves, figuring out how to get them the nutritious food that you would normally be serving them into their own hands. And maybe instead of that, that restaurant experience, they're getting the experience of learning how to cook food for the first times in their lives, because so many people, it's this life skill that, unless you're a chef or a food enthusiast, you really don't have anymore. So yeah, I think it might be a whole new, sort of, well, for industry, for lack of a better term, but a whole new, venue and income source. Helping. I wanted to say
something about the sourdough thing. So there was a sourdough phase of lockdown, and it was fascinating. We did all this food reading on like food science and why it happens. And it came down to the availability of sugar through starch, which equals comfort, which, like, all of these people, like, why did this sourdough thing happen? Why was all the grocery stores sold out of yeast and flour? And it's this base element of humanity that when you're scared and your system dumps all this cortisol and you're constantly under fear and stress, you crave sugar. And how do you get sugar? Well, a lot of times it's through bread. So it was really interesting. A lot of biological stuff going on there.
Really interesting. We have some discussion in the chat going on about food access and some of the income discrepancies and gaps that you addressed earlier, Ben. There's some folks noting that food in Vermont, folks ran out of food a lot. There were people waiting in cars in long lines to get USDA food box distributions, school lunch foods and such. Yeah, with the lockdown, whereas schools often would be kind of the access point for that food. And then we have another question regarding food access. Are any of you involved in advocating for low-income access to organics and local foods? And could you talk a little bit about that? Not sure who wants to take that one first.
I'll jump in on that really quick. So a lot of the demos we do in the schools, we're in Urban Community School, Parma City Schools, Welsh Academy, which is a low-income entry point for St. Ignatius. And we just picked up with behavioral issue kids at Strongsville. Strongsville being the more affluent version of the schools we're in. A lot of the demos we do are into food insecure homes. So we started, instead of doing these demos in class, we're providing meal kits to these kids. So it might be, we're making potato kale soup, for example. Now all of a sudden we have to distribute 115 boxes or packets of all the mise en place to make the soup. And then all the kids would join us on Zoom. Well, we had this amazing opportunity now because we were part of Squash Education Alliance, squash like the handball, the sport. So Urban Squash Cleveland takes kids out of low-income families, puts them into an academic and athletic program, and starts to measure their behavior based on their athletic and academic performance. Well, then we enter in and we say, well, if we do a nutrition intervention, both of those things will increase and behavior issues will go down because we're eliminating a lot of the processed foods and sugar that drive a lot of these behavioral issues. Well, now Squash Education Alliance is a national organization. So now we were on these Zooms and we had SEA approach us from Boston and the Bronx and Brooklyn. And they're like, hey, can we jump on? I was like, well, yeah, we're on Zoom. Everybody's welcome. So it was this really cool thing that became an opportunity to spread this message of like nutritive food. I love how Jonathan said that, like the healing power of nutrient dense food coming from a local proximity from nutrient dense soil is far and away beyond medicine's capability to touch. And just being able to share those moments with kids across, socioeconomic boundaries and now not limited to the confines of the classroom. I'm revisited with that every Thursday when I drive to work because there's a line 1,000 cars long at the municipal lot waiting for National Guard food handouts. So, I mean, it's a real thing. There's people lined up there at 7 o'clock in the morning and they don't start handing out till noon. So that's a real need right now, which is totally at odds with the stock market realities of like people just gaining wealth and all of this bounty of financial benefit when the basis of food seems to be falling apart. So just bringing the access to information, I feel like is so much more important now because food is not medicine. Choice is medicine. And in order to make good choices, you need to be educated not only on what choices do I have, but how do I make that choice? How do I turn this ingredient into food? Food just sits on the counter and rots, but making a choice to use it and eat it. And even the small thing of like, how do we send squash to a family so it gets used? Do they have a cutting board? Do they have knives? Do they know how to roast it? Do they have a roasting pan? Do they live out of a toaster oven? All these factors. So if I send it peeled and diced, is it more likely to become food? As opposed to if I send a whole butternut squash, is that more likely to become compost? These are the questions that we're wrestling with.
Yeah, here at Hocking, we're really lucky that we still had some student workers and we were all still able to work pretty much the whole season. So I don't know if you guys know about CFI, Community Food Initiatives down here in Athens. We just got a letter from them at the end of January telling us that we were able to donate just under $10,000 worth of produce to their food donation station. So yeah, it was really great. Anything that we couldn't get out or that, we had a lot of our wholesale accounts and restaurant accounts that we supply locally. They shut down. So we had a whole lot of extra produce that we weren't expecting to have. So anything extra went to donation station with community food initiatives. And they do help distribute to folks in need. Athens and Meigs is the poorest counties in Ohio, right? Appalachia has not a lot of diversity per se, but we have a lot of poverty. So Rural Action, Community Food Initiatives, AceNet, all these nonprofits around here do a huge amount to get nutritious food to people and help them in times of need. So we're really lucky that they're around and that we can donate to them. And I give them a lot of credit.
Thank you. We don't have any new questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to pop any in there, feel free. In the meanwhile, I've got one, which is kind of akin to what Bryn was asking earlier in terms of will we see this continue after the pandemic subsides. I'm wondering if we'll also see the interest in people growing their own food continue. Like Sasha said about Johnny's being out of seeds for its home growers, and Jonathan saying people decided to go ahead and do things around the house and grow their own. I'm wondering if you all have thoughts on that topic.
I'm definitely hopeful that people will long-term get continue the urge to grow their own food. There's nothing like picking a ripe tomato and taking it in, washing it, and putting it on a slice of bread. It's more nutritious. It tastes better, and you know what's in it. You know how it was handled, and there's a reward in knowing that you put that plant in the ground, you watched it grow, you watered it when it needed water, you know what kind of compost or fertilizer you put on there, you know if it was sprayed with a toxic chemical or not. And I think there's going to be a growing amount of people who are willing to make that extra effort. Although when, if the pandemic subsides and we get back to all the other extracurricular activities that we were used to before, that there's always this prioritization of your time, and gardening and food prep does take time, so it won't be for everyone. But I think we will see more of that because people are becoming more aware of the negative impacts of conventionally grown foods and, long distance trucked in low nutrient foods.
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan. I am an optimist, but I'm also a realist. And I think it emanates a little bit from my time in the Marine Corps of that what we just experienced this year is the beginning. And that's an unfortunate reality to wrestle with, but this is the beginning of a very challenging period of time in this country. It's not over. It's not behind us. And my brother, who travels all around the world and obviously has a lot of insight into the higher up of the government outlook of things, the security of our food system is so dependent on global commerce. Like whether you're buying seeds from Johnny's, High Mowing, Fedco, it's all grown in China, all of it. My old farm manager, Andrea Heim, who was managed Spice Acres for 5 years, went and managed Johnny's last year. And they do seed selection there. And then they find the right seeds that they want. And then they send them over to China. And then they're grown in mass and shelled and brought back and then distributed. So not only is there this huge uptick of, I'm sorry, somebody's making a cappuccino down there. It's a little loud. Not only is there a huge uptick of home garden need, but there's also a disruption of global commerce. So I think it's very important that we examine what we went through this year as a society and experience scarcity and collapse of economies and different sectors of the economy, and really start to visit with, how do I feed myself and my family in a more secure fashion in the coming decade? Because the reality of like COVID is not going away next year. We're going to probably experience versions of this for the next 5 to 7 years. And maybe it'll evolve into the common cold. Maybe it'll get worse. We don't know. But what we do know for a fact is that our weakness has been exposed, not only in the racial and socioeconomic capacity, but in the way that the world functions on trade. So I think home gardening and self-sustaining practices are possibly one of the most important topics that we need to start talking about as a community and as a society.
Thank you, Ben. A lot of good discussion in the chat. We have another question for the educators, formal and informal, and service providers. How do we best support the local food and farm community? Going forward, who is our audience, the people producing the food or the consumers we want to eat the nutrient-rich, healthy, local, delicious foods? Or as you all were just saying, potentially growing their own, and how do we prioritize? Really good question from Denise. Who wants to take that one? Sasha?
Yeah, okay. So how do we best support the local food and farm community? I mean, buy from them. Make sure that they're staying in business. Tell your friends about the great lettuce you got from this farm. Encourage other people to be buying local. Tell them, give them your best recipes that you made with this stuff. Like spread the word so that people know where they can. I mean, social media is about the only way a lot of people have been able to talk and communicate and socialize, and just making Facebook posts about a local farm and getting the word out by word of mouth is huge. It's free advertising. Let's see, going forward, who is our audience? everybody.
And Sasha, and I think Denise is an educator with Central State, so I think she's thinking as an educator, how do we address that? Do you see what I'm saying?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Adds a layer.
Goodness. I would say, let's see here. Man, I mean, I take my students on field trips all over to all of the local farms to show them, I mean, what it's like in the real world actually farming. And when I do, as an like I pay them for their time. I make sure that farmers are getting paid for their contribution to my class. I think if you are going to use any other farm as an example, or you know, depend on a farmer for their knowledge as it to contribute to your program or to your class, pay them for their knowledge, pay them for their time, because it's important. They've worked hard. They have, you know, got this lifetime of experience, and they should be rewarded for helping pass that on. If anyone else wants to add to that,
yeah, does anyone else want to jump in on the prioritizing question? I think that's a really good question. With limited resources, kind of where do we focus our efforts as educators and service providers? Anybody? Denise always did ask good questions, so.
I mean, it's really hard to affect change at like a federal level in a lot of ways, but so getting prioritizing, I said, like, and organizing on a local level seems to be the most effective for people of our ilk, if you will. I'm like, you know, I can't go and affect what the UN says or what, you know, the federal government says about nutrition or this or that, but I can prioritize helping my community get that food. I think starting small scale and understanding like that emergent strategy. It's an amazing book. I have not finished it all, but just understanding how all these tiny little changes and tiny little bits, people working together, how that creates this larger momentum and larger change. I think that's our best strategy for prioritizing healthy food and getting healthy food to people.
Thank you. I have just placed the survey for this session into the chat, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we have about 3 minutes left, and a lot of thanks to the presenters. Quick question, Sasha, about the book you just mentioned. What was that?
Emergent Strategy. Let me see. I want to get her name right. Her last name's Brown.
And I just want to take a moment to thank each of our panelists, Jonathan, Ben, and Sasha, for sharing their really heartfelt and just really honest experiences over the past year, which was a really intense one, and for the good discussion that came from that today. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. I do see that the name of the book was posted there by Sasha. Thank you. Oh, we've got one last question with 2 minutes left. So many crucial problems to tackle and so many important things to care about. Any things that you have to share about, this is a great question, Kendall, maintaining focus, well-being, and stamina while maximizing the impact we can have? Ooh, good closer. Who wants to take that?
Well, I think if we eat good food and have good relationships with the people around us and just stay focused on what I'm here for, what I'm doing. You know, if I feel good, I'll have a lot more stamina than if I'm freaking out, if I'm scared, fearful. You know, just trust and do what you're here to do the best you can. And eat good food, take some supplements, and study about your immune system so that you have well-being and stamina and can do what you're called to do in the place that you are.
Yeah, I echo that. I often go back to the idea of getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and not making long-term decisions in an emotional space, separating the two halves of the brain, emotion and logic. And you can't think logically when you're in an emotional space. And emotions are great. They need to be felt, they need to be worked through, they need to be cried through, they need to be laughed through, but that's not a time to really make a financial decision or a business decision. So I will echo what Jonathan said, body, mind, spirit, take care of yourself, take care of your mind. And then I keep reminding myself and asking every day, just use me for the good of all people. And if we do right by people, they will do right by us. And I believe that. And to echo Sasha's book recommendation, one of the most powerful books I read this year was On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. And I mean, it was written in 41 to 46 AD. And the problems we're experiencing now are in there. It's amazing. I mean, it's just like they're thousands of years old. They might be new to us, but they're not new to the world. And they got through it, and we'll get through it.
Sasha, any parting words? And then we'll go ahead and close.
Yeah, and what I sort of had just posted in the chat, but like, take care of yourself, like, take it easy. Like, you're not in this alone. Naps and baths have saved me this year. Long walks in the woods, taking it one day at a time. Don't push yourself so hard. This is a really hard time for everyone. And if you're going balls to the wall every single day, all the time, you're going to burn out. And we need you. We need all of us. So as the saying goes, I know a lot of moms hear this, you got to put your oxygen mask on yourself before you put anyone else's on. So, and good books too, like Ben said, realizing, yeah, this isn't the first time humanity's faced something like this. We'll figure out a way through.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm finding myself a little teary at the end of this session. Just really appreciate your honesty and your kindness and your willingness to share with us, and also everybody for showing up and participating. So lots of gratitude. Thank you to you all. And I'll go ahead and just close the official session now. If folks want to hang out and chat, please feel free. I'll leave the meeting open. Thank you.
Peace.
Julia, after this, I've been texting like all of my chef friends who I know are struggling emotionally and saying, I need them to see this session. So can you remind us again how we then can, in the future, send the links for friends to watch, to like, I know they might have to buy the session or whatever. I don't remember what was decided, but how can we share this with other people?
That's a great question, Brennan. I don't have a direct answer to it, but I will find out and just post it on the tech health section, or Phil might know.
Yeah,
I'm unmuting.
We're processing the recordings as quickly as we can. They're actually, Renee and Milo are doing most of it, and they're doing a remarkable job. They should probably have it up later today. Basically, the link you clicked on to join this session is where the recording link will be. So yeah, anyone, we'll be opening up the registration probably tomorrow for people who want to buy in to the recordings if they haven't participated in the conference, or otherwise they'll be up till March 31st.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.
Cool.
And thank you, Bryn.
This was a pretty powerful discussion. I'm glad I tuned in this morning, kind of in the middle of work, but I'm feeling guilty now being on the farm, pandemic really wasn't much different for us. We just didn't go out to eat quite as much, but you know, things are pretty normal on the farm. So, you know, I'm sorry to hear it's so rough for so many others. I mean, I've heard on the news, but it means a lot more when you hear it personally. And this session should be heard by a lot of people. You know, it should be on PBS.
Yeah, I really appreciated our presenters today, just and the discussion in the chat, but I just felt like our presenters really shared very candidly and openly, and that's the kind of talk I feel like we need right now. Luann is agreeing with you in the chat. Jeff, I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat.
Yeah,
I'm really I'm really agreeing with Jeff also. Here in Vermont, while we were okay, we saw hunger go up all around us, and we saw a lot of hysteria, and we did see stores with completely empty shelves or with very little food left, and we were really shocked because, of course, we always thought, oh, Vermont, we could feed ourselves. No, the food wasn't from Vermont. The food was coming in on trucks which didn't come, or which came with lots of toilet paper but maybe no grain, or lots of grain but no toilet paper. We saw things fall apart really quickly and get rebuilt. But the step up of the local farmers was incredible, and local solidarity movements, like just kids making free pancakes out in front of our city hall at our capital city. It was crazy. Young punk rock kids feeding the people. It's wild to see what happens this year.
I was really struck by the way so many things got put on the schools to figure out how these kids are going to eat, figure out how we're going to do childcare, figure out, you know, all sorts of things that aren't actually about educating children. And watching the educators kind of respond to that has been somewhat awe-inspiring. I know locally in our community, families like pitched in together to make sure that the kids that were getting free and reduced lunch and breakfast at school were still getting those meals just through a different delivery system and such. It was pretty awesome to watch.
I think the schools felt the same way. They felt like they got dumped on by the state governments, and the governors felt like they got dumped on by the federal government, and nobody took any leadership and, you know, or stuck to the plan that was already made, you know, years ago. And it was just kind of a free for all, and everybody felt like they got dumped on.
I just want to say thank you to all of you. It feels like it's been a very isolated year, and it's so nice to connect with other farmers and educators, and to know that we're not alone, and that we do make a small but perhaps a mighty difference every day. Small actions can work together to create larger ones, larger changes. And I'm really inspired to hear from all of you and just to be connected even in this virtual space. So thank you for being you and for what you do.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you for sharing that. I think I'll go ahead and end the meeting then, if folks are done visiting. again, just really appreciate your participation and the good discussion. And we can also pick it back up on Socio if folks want to get on there and start a discussion too about the session or about what was shared. So feel free to jump on the app too. Thank you so much for your time and participation today. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.